And now I shall probably, if I can explain it properly, try to make people understand something. So a lot of guys, you might want to pull back here for a minute, because I might actually go on for this for a minute. A lot of guys buy custom guns, and they don't know why they're buying custom guns. Not really. Like, they have this, like, this concept and these ideas of, like, okay, I'm getting a custom gun because of why. Well, part of the reason that, to me, that you get a custom gun is you actually get a custom chamber. Now, here's the crazy thing. Do you know how many guys there are building custom guns that have factory chambers in them? That is SAMI spec, Sporting Arms Ammunition Manufacturers Institute. In other words, again, to me, these archaic standards that were set at the time the cartridge was developed, which some of these cartridges we're talking about, these numbers were set up 100 years ago in, say, 30-06, 100 years ago, right? Or, say, you know, 300 Winchester. 50 years ago, these numbers were established, and the industry has been clinging to those numbers for all those years. Now, some things are starting to change. And 6.5 Creedmoor, part of the reason 6.5 Creedmoor is so popular is because it was designed properly from the beginning. In other words, they considered how long the cartridge was, they considered what bullets they were going to be using in those cartridges, and they set up a cartridge overall length that is compatible with all the other components that are being used. The issue is, there's tons of guys building supposed custom guns, and they're using SAMI spec factory reamers. In other words, so you just paid all this money for this custom gun, and you got the exact same chamber in it that if you would have just walked in Cabela's and bought a Remington 700 off the shelf. It's the same exact chamber. It's not minimum spec. It's definitely not tight neck, and the actual length for the cartridge overall length is SAMI spec, which you noticed in those books, that was short. Everything is short. It has the bullet jammed way down in there. All right? When it's done properly, oh boy, this is going to be, I don't even know if you can do this. Why don't you take that camera, stand up there, and look at all of those crazy shells that are sitting right there. See if you can show them that. No, the actual, not those. These. Let me pull back here a second. I'm not going to lift all those out of there, people. I'm sorry. But what you're looking at right here is dummy rounds. Do you understand? These are dummy rounds for all the different reamers that I've made. And what you do is you take whatever brass you're going to use, you take whatever bullet you're going to use, you set it up the way you want it, SAMI specs be danged. Okay, you don't pay any attention to that. So you make your dummy rounds the way you want them, you send them out. I send them to Dave Manson. Hi Dave, good job. Send them to Dave Manson, and he will make me a reamer that matches my dummy round. And then when I say match, my instructions to him is always, Dave, match it as close as possible. What you got to realize, I mean, these are real machinist guys, grinding. All right, that may not mean anything to you, but they're working down into 1/10,000. So what I say to him is, match my dummy round as close as possible, but let it function. And sometimes that means just barely function, because I'm way more concerned with accuracy than I am with function. And to some people that may seem strange. Now, I'll come back and say the caveat of that is, if the guy's going to build a 375 H&H to go to Africa and shoot a Cape Buffalo at 50 yards, then we don't need to run minimum specs. You understand what I'm saying? If I'm going to build a gun that is built to accept factory ammunition, say purposely, say we're going to build a 30-06, and the whole purpose of it is it will accept factory ammo, well then we'll run minimum specs, but we can't go super minimum. Because it's got, you think about it, 30-06. If you walked in Cabela's or Sportsman's Warehouse, or you went to Midway right now, how many 30-06 different brands, bullet weights are available? And I've actually looked on Midway, there's like 150. 150 different options in 30-06. So if you're going to build a 30-06 gun, and it's going to accept factory ammunition, you have to realize that's a huge spectrum, right? 150 different loads it's got to take. So you have to take all that into account when you get the reamer made and when you chamber the gun. But this is a 338 Lapua for long range accuracy. So you put a tight neck in it, you build your dummy round, you get a minimum spec reamer. In other words, it's truly minimum spec, just barely fits, and then you get more accuracy. So that's just a whole big rant, because there is a lot of guys building so-called custom guns, or the semi-custom guns. Let's not even get into that, the mass-produced ones. They're just using semi-spec reamers. That's all they're doing. It's the same exact chamber that would be in a Ruger or a Remington or a Savage, same exact thing. And then the guys get those guns and they're like, well, I paid $8,000 for this gun and it only shoots 1.25 inches. Well, like, duh. Of course it only shoots 1.25 inches. You got a factory chamber in it. The only thing you really got was hopefully a better receiver and a better barrel, and maybe someone did vetting. Anyways, I could go on, and I'm not going to, because I'll get mad. Those people, in my opinion, are hurting the industry, because guys buy those guns, they paid a whole lot of money for them, they don't shoot, and those guys just get jaded. They get angry and jaded. Now, every now and then, they'll take a risk again, and then they have to pick someone that does it right, because they only get burned twice. After that, they're done, and they'll just go back and buy a whatever. They'll just walk in a store and buy a gun. They'll never know the really positive side of true custom guns. All right, so we turned this down 2 more, and we're going to run this on there again, and we're going to just take off a little bit more. And partly we're just doing this for the camera. And you can hear it hitting the high spot, right? Okay, now, it's... Go ahead, say what you got to say.
I was just going to say in these notes, does he want to put, when you expand next, use dry lube, and then turning?
Right, okay, now you notice we've the high side, the cleanup side has got bigger, and the valley has got a little smaller, right? So obviously we knocked some more off of it, but not very much. And then we're going to have to stop and, hey, the nice clean white piece of paper like this. You have another one? Mm-hmm. Okay, get one out. And Sam, reach up there behind you on that shelf over on the right and get me a calculator. It's right there on the right. Okay, so look here. Watch the calipers. So now we are at, that one's at 14. Rotate it. 14, 14. 13.5 at a low spot, 13.5. So we're at 14, we're basically half and half now. 14 on one side, 13 on the other. Now remember, we went to 12, is what we originally went to. So I want to show you something now. Let's just say we were at 14 uniform, right? 14 thousandths the whole way around. So the way that looks is, and here I'll do it really like crude so you can actually see it. So if it's, and that would actually be written, 14 thou is actually written like 0.014, right? That's the way it's written. All right, so what that is though is, it's really simple. It's 14 on one side and 14 on the other side, which is 28, right? You can see this. Now, we measured a bullet, right? And a bullet measures 338, right? And that's .338. So you just take 338 and you add the 28 to it, right? So that's 16, carry the 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 336. So if your brass measured 14 on a side, your loaded cartridge neck diameter would measure 366. Now here's the interesting thing. The neck in the gun is 365, right? This is the neck in the gun. All right, remember what we said. You must have at least 1 thou neck clearance. So the very biggest that our loaded cartridge neck diameter, geez, this is hard to say all this stuff. The very biggest that we would ever want it is 364. Now again, the exception to this is if you're shooting an honest-to-gosh bench rifle and you're an advanced hand loader and you really know what you're doing. But even at 364, that's awful darn close. What that means is you only have, that was 0.0005. That is all you have for clearance on a side. Half a thou on a side. That's a very small number. So you have to be careful here. So we noticed that he had 362.5. So we're going to keep trimming this down until we get closer to adding up what would be that number. And in fact, you know, part of me, since we're doing 50 anyways, part of me wants to experiment with a little bit tighter neck tension. But here's something else, and this will be an important thing on this video. Tighter neck tension tighter neck clearance does not always equate to smaller groups. And in fact, with certain cartridges, with certain brass, more clearance can sometimes be better. When I say more clearance, I'm talking about 3 thou total. 3 thou total, which is kind of like a custom gun builder standard. 3 thou total, that's 1.5 on a side. But I've experimented anywhere down to like half total, half a thou total, right? The whole way up to even 5 thou clearance. And usually you're going to hit a sweet spot somewhere in there at 3 thousandths clearance, 2 thousandths clearance. Sometimes you go the whole way down to 1 thou clearance, and instead of getting better accuracy, you'll actually get worse. Now, there's more to it than that, because, and again, this is getting so deep. I don't even know how we're going to get this all in one video, but you realize we've expanded these up, right? You know we've expanded these up. And get a new piece of brass, please, Brian. Get a brand new piece of brass out of that box. Alright, so here's a brand new piece. We don't want to get these mixed up. But this is a brand new piece. Obviously, that bullet will not go down in there. I could not push that in there with my hands if I was Hercules. Alright? Because it measures... And again, this is a really poor way to do this. You should do this with an inside mic. It measures 336, and the bullet measures 338. So that means there's 2 thousandths neck tension right there that you would have to overcome to shove that bullet down in there. All right. Now, I don't want to get too far off track here. But, these are the ones that we've expanded up and everything, right? Well, I still couldn't push it down in there, but I could push it in easier if I could. Please put that back. All right. Now, here's the thing. And I hope I'm going to explain this right. In a normal, well, I wish I had an example here. And if this was a normal 338 Lapua, let's just say it was a Savage factory gun, and we reached over there and got some of that 338 Lapua factory ammunition, and we put the factory ammunition in the factory gun, and we fired it. When you took the empty piece of brass out, you would be able to take this bullet and drop it right down through the case. And the reason is because the diameter of the neck in the factory chamber is big enough that it allows the brass to expand beyond its ability to snap back. All right? So that's the way normal factory guns are set up. So then what do you have to do? You have to run it into a die or a bushing, push it back down so that you can get enough neck tension to hold a bullet, right? All right. In a tight neck gun, this is a 365 neck gun, and let's say our loaded ammunition, we're going to make this easy, is 363. That is only 2 thousandths clearance on a side. So when you put it in the gun and you fire it, take it back out, the bullet will not go back down in the case. Because the brass expanded enough to let the bullet go, but it went right back to its original dimension. So you don't have to do anything to see the bullet. What was this fired in? That's fired in one of his from their gun, right? That's
fired.
See? That was actually a good idea. That's what I wanted to show. So see, this is fired brass out of this gun we're working on right now. So this bullet will not go back down in there. All right. And let's try and measure it. And you're going to find out that it's very, very close. Look, 337. 0.337. So this still has 1/1000th neck tension. In other words, you would need a die to seat that bullet back down in there. So part of the beauty of this is why you buy true custom guns, the brass, I won't say it doesn't work hard, because it's going to work hard as you do it. But you don't need to do any resizing. You don't need to size the necks. You basically don't have to do anything damaging to the case. And you could just knock out the primer, put a new primer in, put powder in it, reseat the bullet, and go shoot it again. And here's the real beauty of it. You pick up more accuracy because you didn't do anything to this. This is exactly the way it came out of the chamber. You get it? All right, because that's, to me, that's the whole reason of buying a custom gun, is things like this. Because your brass potentially will last forever. And the necks won't split, and you have to do way less damage to the brass. You don't have to do sometimes any resizing. Make sure that goes back where it was. Again, big long-winded thing, but that's partly why we're doing all this stuff.
So once you've prepped your brass correctly in the beginning, there's a whole lot less work on the backside.
Right. The things you never have to do again, you don't have to uniform primer pockets again. But I will say this, I use my primer pocket uniformer as my primer pocket cleaner. So I run it in again, just to clean my primer pockets, but it's already uniformed. Your flash hole uniforming tool, you never have to do again. You don't do any of that again. Your trim to length, boy, that brings it, you're asking good questions. All right, so in a factory gun, let's just use 30-06 because it's like as generic as it can possibly be. Everybody knows that if you go to the store and you buy a factory 30-06 and you shoot factory 30-06 ammo in it, and this is the other part that's important, you use a standard 30-06 RCBS, whatever, normal die, you're going to be trimming forever. You got to trim like every second, third, fourth firing. The reason is because it's continuing to grow and grow and grow and grow because it can. Because there's room. There's room for it. There is excess room for it to grow, radially and lengthwise. Also, running it in a normal, and I'm not picking on our RCBS, I like RCBS, but a normal RCBS reloading die, a $40 set of dies, that die is going to take that piece of brass that's been fired in that chamber, and it's going to push it down not just to original factory spec, the way it came out of the box or bag, it's going to push it down even further. A little bit below that. And when it does that, you think about it. If you squeeze something this way, where's it can go? It can only go one way. That's this way. Right? Think about little kids' Play-Doh. Grab it in your hands and squeeze it. It gets longer. Right? Okay, that's what's taking place in 99.9% of all the guns that are out there. That's taking place repeatedly. The guy puts factory ammunition in it in a factory chamber. He shoots it. That factory ammunition gets huge. It blows out into the chamber. The chamber's oversized. All right, you've exceeded its ability to snap back because there was too much room, excess room. Now, you run it into a die that is on the small side, all dimensions. So you squeeze it down. That's why you have to put lube on it, by the way, to get it to go in and be able to get it back out. You squeeze it down. When you squeeze it, it grows lengthwise. So what do you have to do? You have to trim. Because if you don't trim, eventually the front of the case mouth will be ramming into the chamber. And it won't want to go in. Plus, that can cause, it's a whole other set of issues, because as it rams into the front of the chamber, it'll squeeze it. It'll pinch it, and it's basically like crimping it. And that's why all the warnings in the book, again, if I'd had this, if this was scripted, we'd have the books laid out, and it will say, warning, do not exceed this cartridge, not cartridge overall length, this case length. Because if they get too long and it jams into the front, it tapers it and it squeezes it down. So you're building a bomb again, you understand? Because it has no way of expanding and no way of letting that bullet go. All right. The reason you buy custom guns then, to me, is to avoid all that. Because you get a minimum spec chamber, you have a tight neck, if you want a tight neck, your brass actually fits the chamber to begin with. In other words, if we were up at the shop and I could show you a chamber that's in the lathe that's just cut, and I actually do this, by the way. I don't just, most guys use Headspace gauges. I have go gauges that I use as I get close because they're steel. But when I'm actually chambering a gun, and again, it's other guys do this though, I use the piece of brass. And what's really interesting is that Dave Manson gets it so perfect, because you realize I'll send him this piece of brass, and he will make the reamer to this piece of brass. After that chamber is in there, I take this and push it in, and you have to put your little finger up against it, and it goes in, and when you pull it out, it goes. That's how perfect it fits. Like perfect. And the deal about that is when it goes off, it can't expand, because there's no room to expand. There's nowhere for it to go. So therefore, it doesn't exceed its, and I always get these mixed up. There's elasticity and plasticity. One of them is how far it can stretch. The other one is, will it stretch back, I think. Guys will be correcting me on that. Go ahead and correct me, then I'll get it straight. But it never exceeds that ability. So it goes off, right? It expands just super minuscule. It expands just a hair. It snaps right back to its original dimensions. So then the beauty of it is you don't have to do anything to it. You don't have to do anything to it. And eventually, all brass work hardens. So that might be the first firing. Again, this is really for the next, this is for once fired, twice fired, three fired, when we get into that part. But initially, after you fire it one time, you may have to do nothing. 2 times, you may have to do nothing. 3 times, you may have to do nothing. Eventually, getting hit with all that pressure, the brass is going to start to work hard. All right, so then the next thing normally you do is you bump shoulders. That is, push the shoulder back just slightly, because the case is trying to grow lengthwise. All right, just bump it. And when I say bump it, I'm talking like 1 thou. 1 thou will go the difference between, and maybe we'll get to see this, but 1 thou can be the difference between this won't chamber, you bump it 1 thou and it just drops in. That's how close the tolerances we're talking about. Okay, but eventually, after enough times of bumping shoulders, you won't be able to bump shoulders anymore because it won't want to go in. It'll spring back. And then you've got to go to some type of die that touches the body. So like in those Redding sets, there's a body die. Usually, to me, they're a little bit too constricted. They're too tight. But then the next place to go is a true custom full-length sizer die that is made for your chamber. That is so that they're compatible. So that instead of taking one of these dies, any of these dies, and pushing it way down, which is losing your accuracy. Because part of your accuracy is the fact that this case fits so perfectly in that chamber. It's custom fit. Well, if you shove it in a die and push it down 2 or 3 thou, you're going to give up a bunch of accuracy. So the very best way then, when you have to actually size the whole case, is a custom-made full-length sizer die, and that is like a 5-hour video, and we're not going into that. And these guys look like they're getting tired anyways. We're going to quit and go eat. So we'll be back.